Episode number 72 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. My guest today is Dr. Lora Shahine. Dr. Shahine is a reproductive endocrinologist currently practicing at the Pacific Northwest Fertility and IVF specialists in Seattle. Originally from North Carolina, Dr. Shahine graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and completed her training in medical school at the Wake Forest University School of Medicine, residency in obstetrics and gynecology at the University of California at San Francisco, and fellowship in reproductive endocrinology and infertility at Stanford University. As clinical assistant professor at the University of Washington and director of the Center for Recurrent Pregnancy Loss at Pacific Northwest Fertility, she is committed to providing excellence in patient care, teaching the next generation of women's healthcare providers, and continuing research in the fields of fertility and recurrent miscarriage. She has published over 50 peer-reviewed research projects and is an active member of the Early Pregnancy Special Interest Group of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, Seattle Gynecology Society, and the Babyquest Fertility Grant organization. Dr. Shahine is an accomplished author of her own blog and 3 patient-centered books of integrative approach to fertility care and recurrent miscarriage, including her best-selling book, Unbroken. She is passionate about patient education and changing the conversation surrounding infertility and miscarriage from one of shame and guilt to one of support and empowerment. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Shahine.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So we just spoke in the pre-talk, and I was telling you how I feel like you bring humanness into the field of reproductive endocrinology. I love following you on Instagram. I love how you educate your patients, and you have so much heart in this field. So can you share your journey on becoming a reproductive endocrinologist, as well as a leading voice on fertility and pregnancy loss?
Oh, thank you so much for those kind words. I have no real family members that were physicians growing up or mentors, but I always knew that I wanted to help people, and I felt that going into medicine was a wonderful way to have a profession and help people at the same time. And I loved all of my experiences in medical school. I was a real nerd, so I loved surgery and I loved clinic work, and I was really drawn to women's health. And so a residency in obstetrics and gynecology really combined all those interests. And through the residency, I did enjoy delivering babies and helping people with gynecologic issues, but I kept being drawn to the field of reproductive endocrinology because I loved so many aspects of it. I loved the technology. I loved the fact that I knew I'd never stop learning because there's always something new coming down to help people. And I really enjoyed helping people when they're in such a vulnerable state. It is a real sense of hopelessness and frustration when your journey does not match the narrative that our society tells us, that it's easy to get pregnant. And so I really enjoyed helping people, and I did not shy away from the emotional impact that infertility has. It just seemed like a great fit.
That's awesome. I do really feel your heart in this, and you could tell just by following you and the books that you've written, you could tell that you started this with such an intent to help.
Thank you.
And you also seem very open-minded to different modalities, and you seem to work with people that are, you wrote a book with a licensed acupuncturist. You seem to be very open to different modalities.
I am. I really believe that the more and more we learn about reproduction, the mind-body connection, Eastern medicine, and the impact of nutrition. I feel like the more that we learn, the more we realize that we don't know yet, and it's
Yes,
humbling, but
absolutely.
powerful at the same time. And before we started recording, you and I talked about how I grew up on the East Coast, but I really did my training, in San Francisco at UCSF and fellowship at Stanford. But in medical school at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, I did an externship in San Francisco for a summer, where I worked with an acupuncturist and a medical doctor there that for the first time was using Eastern medicine in order to treat stage 4 breast cancer. And the
Mm.
Eastern medicine provider was Yeshi Dandin, who was the private doctor to the Dalai Lama. It was this incredible experience. And I came back to North Carolina just energized and excited about what I had seen. This project was on CBS and all this stuff. And I presented my project to the people in my medical school, and I really got negative feedback, just a real sort of slap in the face. Of course, there were people in North Carolina that were excited, but the vast majority were not very open or welcoming. And then when I
Mhm.
moved to Seattle, the very first person that referred a patient to me, I didn't do my training in Seattle, and it takes a while to kind of build up your referral base in a new city. The first person that referred to me was the acupuncturist that we ended up writing that book together. And so,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, and she's become a really great friend. And just being open and being humble has, everybody heals in different ways. And I don't think there's any one way to look at something as gray and as humbling as infertility. So it's been a fun journey.
Absolutely. And I was just saying, because I refer a lot of my patients to reproductive endocrinologists, and I'm always looking and listening to my patients' feedback. And I would have loved if you lived close to me. Would have been great.
Thank you.
um, but yeah, it is really important, I think, because I really truly believe that it takes a village. There's so many different aspects to the fertility journey, and we really do need so many different perspectives on this. So I love when people work together in the community. I find it really important. And you also seem to have a passion for empowering women who have experienced pregnancy loss, which is it's such an important topic, because sometimes I feel that it doesn't really have the space that it needs.
Mhm.
Sometimes people, go through it feeling alone, and they don't have, because it's not like when a person is alive and has been born and is, has been lost, then we have ceremony, we have the community coming together. And when this happens, it seems like a lot of times the couple has to go through it alone in their own different ways. So I find that it's such an important topic that may be in many circumstances not given the care that it needs. So how did you begin putting more emphasis on that?
Absolutely. I agree with so much of what you said. And, different cultures are really different. In Japanese culture, there's a real sense of honoring children who are lost at any stage,
Hmm.
whether it's before birth or after birth. And um, that is just, it really doesn't ring true in a lot of Western cultures. It's something that women are encouraged not to really share that they're pregnant until after the first trimester, just in case. And if you could see my air quotes, it's kind of like, well, just in case
Yes.
of what? Just in case of loss, well, so when someone needs support and caring, because they have a first trimester miscarriage, they haven't told any of their friends that they're pregnant yet. And you can argue both ways that it's also really difficult to tell everybody you're pregnant and have them excited, and then have to tell them the disappointing news, and that might be painful. But yeah, it is really hidden in the shadows, and that allows it to sit in shame and guilt. And it's
Mm-hmm.
so common, 1 in 4 pregnancies will result in miscarriage. And, I have patients that just feel like it's only them. And then when they start to share with friends and families, they find that their own mothers had miscarriages that they never
Mm-hmm.
told them about. And if you just can connect with people, it makes you feel less alone and less broken. Um, you know, you asked how I got interested in it. So a lot of people don't realize that truly the experts in first trimester miscarriage are reproductive endocrinologists.
Mm-hmm.
So we do 4 years of obstetrics and gynecology training. And then after that, we do a 3-year fellowship in reproductive endocrinology. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that is infertility and IVF and helping people conceive. But we do learn a lot about first trimester pregnancy, and that includes miscarriage. And so when I was doing my training at Stanford, my mentor, Dr. Ruth Lottie, was opening up the Center for Recurrent Pregnancy Loss in Stanford. And that was one of very few, like less than 5 in the United States. And I learned a lot being in the right place at the right time. And when
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Seattle to start my practice and my career up here, it wasn't my intent to focus on recurrent loss, but I saw so many patients that had seen other providers and realized that there really wasn't someone in the area at that time that was focused on this particular issue. And so, with the help of many people, including my mentors at Stanford, I opened up a center here in Seattle, and I'm just very humble. I mean, there's so much we still have to learn, but I think just providing that care and allowing a place for people to feel comfortable to talk about it has just really helped a lot of people.
I can only imagine. I mean, I also was mentioning to you before that I love the image you chose for your book, Not Broken, um, because it uses the symbol of the kintsugi pottery, which I just
Mhm.
has so much meaning to it. Kintsugi pottery, for people that don't know, it's a Japanese form of art. When a pottery gets broken, they actually take it and put it together with like gold glue, and it's gorgeous. It becomes prettier after that than it was before. So I think it's just such a beautiful symbol. And so, can you share about your book and what it's about and how it can help couples that have experienced the loss of miscarriage?
Oh, thank you. Yes, so as I was seeing more and more patients in Seattle, I really wanted to recommend a book for patients to help them because there's just so much information. We're doing so many tests, and we're talking about different treatment options. And so I searched for a book in order to allow patients to ask more questions because you can just only absorb so much, even in an hour visit. And a lot of questions would come to us, to the clinic after patients left. And I couldn't find what I wanted. I found a lot of books written by physicians in the late 2000s, maybe, or early 2000s, that were very wordy, very
Hmm.
thick, and quite honestly, just out of date with the current evidence. And then I found a lot of inspirational personal stories from women that had had miscarriage. But I couldn't really find what I wanted. And I know it, I don't mean to sound flippant. It was a lot of hard work, but I decided to write something for my
Hmm.
patients, something that I would want to be able to give to them. And that's what I do. So after their first visit, they get a copy of the book Not Broken. And it's basically going through, hey, these are the tests that we're doing, and this is the thought about different treatment options. There's a whole chapter just in controversial care of miscarriage, and it's very different than anything that's out there because so much of anything that goes wrong, again in air quotes, with reproduction, as far as family building, miscarriage, infertility, just for you know hundreds of years or more has always been the woman's fault. And because it's surrounded in shame and guilt, and the narrative is that, number one, it's easy to get pregnant, and number two, nobody has miscarriages, that when somebody is struggling, they feel like it's just them and they feel like their body is broken, even though the most common cause of miscarriage is something genetic within the embryo. It's a chromosome imbalance, and it's a unique problem and issue that's actually quite natural. I think it's a part of evolution. Doesn't feel good to have a miscarriage, but actually your body's actually working and sort of knowing that this isn't going to be a healthy pregnancy. And there are a lot of books out there that really focus on trying to tell women what's wrong with their immune system and what's wrong with their blood clotting, and what food they should be eating. And I mean, all of these things are really important to talk about, but they just add to the shame and make people feel even worse that, well, why didn't I discover that this was an issue before I started trying to conceive? So I want it to be, it's evidence-based, but it's also supportive, and I hope it's a helpful resource.
Yeah, actually, the word that came to my mind is relatable. You're kind of that was the word that I wanted to find. I was like, there's something to describe you as a doctor, is that you're very relatable. Therefore, you wrote a book to help people feel some kind of relating to it and knowing that they're not alone, which I think is huge. And the fact that you're shining a light on the fact that it's not something that it just happens randomly. It happens to a lot of people. It's actually something that's a lot more common that people realize, so that they don't feel alone. And especially, I think when somebody goes through IVF and is already having difficulties and challenges getting pregnant, then it becomes a lot. I mean, it's hard for everybody, but then it's like, you spend all the money and you invest all this time, and then you lose the baby. So it really is something that needs attention. And I think it's great that you're giving something to people to let them know that this is a lot more common than people realize, because I think that that is a very big misconception.
I agree. When they were first starting to delve into and learn how to create home pregnancy tests, decades ago, there was a doctor at the NIH that was collecting urines from women all over the country who may or may not have been actively trying to conceive. But just once a month, they would collect a urine and test it for the pregnancy
Mm-hmm.
hormone. And that's one of the first times that we really realized how common it is for people to have biochemical
Mm-hmm.
miscarriages, or like a positive pregnancy test that didn't result in a
Mm-hmm.
baby. A lot of people would, just have maybe a day or two late period, and they had no idea that they actually had implantation and a positive pregnancy hormone. And that's one of the reasons that there was a lot of argument against, putting home pregnancy tests in drugstores. And they didn't think women could handle the information that they were having a positive pregnancy test and then a loss. It's just a fascinating part of, reproductive
Mm-hmm.
history. And so it's good and bad in that, well, this is a part of natural conception. Like it doesn't sound nice, but it's true that human reproduction is actually very inefficient, and not all embryos are going to be
Mm-hmm.
babies. And so I just
Right.
want people to hear this and know this. It doesn't take away the sadness. I mean, even if you don't have a positive pregnancy test, a period feels like a loss and
Mm-hmm.
grieving when you're trying to conceive. But I want people to know, if they do have a biochemical miscarriage, it's more common than they may think. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's something drastically wrong.
Absolutely. And like I said, people who are already going through the IVF journey already come in thinking something's wrong to begin with. So it definitely is very helpful to know that this is just a part of nature. And do you have anything on there, for people who do go through that, coping skills or coping techniques that people can do, or group therapy, anything to alleviate or help the loss?
Absolutely. I think that paying attention to the emotional and mental well-being of patients is as important as the physical and maybe scientific treatments that we're doing. Because, and you had this excellent interview with one of my favorite people in the world, Dr. Ali Domar, from the Domar Institute in Boston, talking about the impact of mental well-being on fertility. I loved that interview, and I love her books, and I just really, love the studies that sort of shows how the main reason people stop trying to conceive or stop doing fertility treatments is not necessarily lack of financial resources or insurance coverage, but it's emotional stress and mental um, being
Mm-hmm.
unwell, depression and anxiety. And that if we can help and pay attention to these things, not only does it help people continue to try if that's right for
Mm-hmm.
them. If someone decides to stop treatment because they would like to pursue a different option like adoption or maybe life without
Mm-hmm.
children, because that's a positive choice for them, that is great. But if someone
Mm-hmm.
stops treatment or stops trying to conceive because we aren't supporting their emotional or mental well-being, then we've failed them. We have to pay attention to that. And the, stress and difficulty of going through infertility and miscarriage really can last far beyond a successful fertility treatment. It's been associated with or likened to post-traumatic stress disorder,
Mm-hmm.
and people for years after even having the baby that they have desired
Yeah.
will still get triggered with things that they see on social media or um, triggers with being invited to a baby shower. And, just having a baby doesn't erase the journey that it takes to get there. And I think that I do see so many patients that are just so goal oriented, baby oriented, that they don't leave space for the mental and self-care that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so those people, that journey has to be addressed at some point because it's going to come out at some point. So I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like it's so important to take care of yourself along the whole journey.
I'm with you. I agree with you 100%. It's really the emotional and mental well-being is at the core of everything. And I've had conversations with other people who have become fertility experts and have gone through it themselves and were motivated by their own journey. And I had spoken
Mhm.
to one fertility coach, and we talked about joy. Sometimes we can shelf it, and I think that's a human thing. Sometimes we wait until some kind of outcome happens until we are allowed to enjoy or have feel joy. And that's something that we can always produce regardless of what we believe about it. We can always produce it. It really comes from us. It's just, when do we allow ourselves to feel that? It's like we need X, Y, and Z first before we can allow ourselves to feel that. And it's a very difficult thing, no doubt. It's very important just to allow ourselves that space and self care and self love throughout the journey, just to get through it. Forget the outcome, just to feel well. So I think it is such an important part of it. And again, this is why I liked you so much, because I really felt that heart that you feel, and protectiveness. When I feel the same way about my patients, because it's such a difficult journey that can't be underestimated at all. And like you said, PTSD also, it's compared to a cancer diagnosis. That's how emotionally draining this is. And I know you also have something called Babyquest that you're part of. What is that for listeners that have not heard about it?
Sure. And just so you know, I was just nodding the whole time you were talking. You can't see me nod, but I was just, agreeing with you the whole time. So Babyquest is a wonderful nonprofit organization founded by Pamela Hirsch several years ago as a way to give fertility grants to people that need fertility treatment but that are unable to pay for them themselves. Only 11 states in the United States have laws requiring insurance coverage for fertility treatments.
Mm-hmm.
And even when a state says that it's covered, it doesn't necessarily cover everyone. And there's a lot of people out there that if their employers don't choose to help pay for fertility treatments, it really has to be all out of pocket.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on the board of Babyquest for a number of years and just really have been impressed with all that they're doing to not only help individual people, have the families that they really dream of, which is there's over 80 babies that have been born so far.
Oh, wow.
Um, but she also just works tirelessly to increase awareness and help people kind of learn a little bit more about the whole journey. And she's just truly an inspiration.
That's amazing. So for people who are looking to get extra help and can't afford it, what do? They apply?
Exactly. Yeah, there's they can go to babyquest.com
Mm-hmm.
and there are applications deadlines a couple times a year. The next one is April 2nd,
Mm-hmm.
I believe. And they apply to Babyquest, and then they need to be working with a fertility center. Like typically, these are patients that are pursuing IVF, and they work with an IVF center. And Babyquest gets permission to get some medical information about them from the clinic that they're working with, and kind of helps. It's not that. I mean, people need to kind of qualify for the grant. So unfortunately, not everybody gets the grant
Mm-hmm.
that they would love and deserve.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to make choices, and Pam and the team kind of work tirelessly to try to help as many people as they can.
Yeah, this is a great resource. I mean, there's so many people. It's really terrible because it's so expensive, and a lot of people can't afford it. And the fact that insurance, which I think might be changing, it sounds like. I mean, I think that it's starting to become more considered through insurance
Hmm.
companies because I've read some articles and heard some things. So hopefully that'll be the case of the future. But it's a great resource for people who have been trying for so many years and just can't afford treatment.
Yes, exactly. It People can get very creative. I've seen people do like Kickstarter campaigns, or funding maybe like a race. There's this wonderful um, organization that my practice, Pacific Northwest Fertility, has partnered with, called Fertility Walk. And it started by this family in Utah that they did their own fertility walk to help raise funds for their own family.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
then
cool.
now they've completed their family, and they're organizing walks in, it's over 5 different states right now. And so Seattle, we're getting ready for our, I believe it's our 4th walk this April during National Infertility Awareness Week.
Hmm.
And people can come and walk, and there's a drawing at the end of the walk, and the person who wins, gets uh, a grant for fertility treatment at our practice. And several of the practices in Seattle do that. So people get really creative and in ways to fund. I do wish it was covered, and we're working in Washington State to help make that a reality.
Hmm.
I really think Massachusetts really leads in the best coverage, and they've had mandated coverage since, I believe it's 1987. I mean, it's
Really?
really
Wow.
incredible. Yeah, and they have, I think it's like 6 IVF cycles for each child that you're trying to have. I'm not 100% sure, don't quote me on that, but every state is different too. So like Hawaii will fund 1 IVF cycle per family.
Hmm.
and like New York and I believe Connecticut have funded IVF for fertility preservation in cancer patients.
Mm.
And so that's one step forward, but I'd love for it to be seen more.
Actually, since you do bring up cancer, I had spoken to a friend of mine who years ago was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had mentioned to me about how, because her breast cancer was sensitive to estrogen, if a person does go through breast cancer and that particular type that's sensitive to estrogen, how does that impact them if they want to in the future go through IVF?
Yes. So we help a lot of breast cancer patients preserve their fertility. A typical story would be that a patient would come to us with a new diagnosis and would be considering maybe surgery or radiation or chemotherapy. And we'd very often do an IVF cycle, maybe between surgery and chemotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it just takes the reproductive endocrinologist working with the oncologist. And if breast cancer is estrogen sensitive, there are some medications that we can give in the IVF process that will keep estrogen levels low, but
Mm-hmm.
still allow us to recruit and freeze eggs. So that would not be a strict limitation to somebody doing fertility preservation in the setting of breast cancer.
Okay, that's great information to know. Um, Probably great information to know for a lot of people listening. That's something that I've always been curious about, and I'm glad I had you on and I thought about it because I didn't think about it beforehand. Um, so, is there any tip that you can share for listeners who are currently experiencing fertility challenges, something that, um, they could do or think about if they can't obviously go to you because they don't live close by?
Sure. I think something that's important to really think about is not being afraid to have a consult or get an evaluation
Hmm.
earlier rather than later. I think in general, people are pretty fearful of seeing a fertility specialist because they're afraid either we're going to find something really wrong or they're afraid that we're not going to find anything wrong or
Hmm.
that can necessarily be fixed. But I think getting testing earlier rather than later will hopefully make the journey to a baby shorter. So there are people that just make really broad assumptions, like the male partner might have had a baby in the past with maybe a different partner, and so they just assume that the sperm count's going to be just fine.
Hmm.
But things can change,
Yeah.
and it's really important to do a semen analysis because 30 to 40% of couples will have a male factor infertility.
Right. Such a good point.
I just think like thanks. Yeah, just not being afraid to get the testing done and really have it interpreted with an expert. Um, and I do think that in general, everybody wants that magic supplement or magic fertility diet
Hmm.
that's going to make them, have a baby on when they want it. And I just think people can get really focused on minutia when it comes to that type of thing. And I just try to encourage people to be healthy. That is if you're getting regular exercise, you're eating well, lots of fruits and vegetables, taking a prenatal vitamin, just the basics of being healthy, getting sleep is important. Um, and I do really talk about the emotional well-being. I know we've hit on that a lot, but I just want people to practice self-care, whether it's taking time out of their week to read a book quietly or get that regular exercise or get a massage once a month. Whatever it is to take time for themselves is really important. So many people in this fertility journey really get into this um, hamster wheel or sort of pattern of self-sacrifice
Hmm.
and become a martyr
Yeah.
in order to have a baby. And so they are so desperate to do everything right, and I'm putting up air quotes again, or be good, that they, don't drink any alcohol, don't have any caffeine. They change their lifestyle dramatically, after ovulation. So for 2 weeks out of the month, they might be going to CrossFit. And then after ovulation, they don't do any exercise. They, just have their entire life on hold and honestly kind of make themselves miserable
Mm-hmm.
in the process. And I do want people to be healthy, but I don't want them to become miserable in the process, because they have a higher chance of giving up if they're really dissatisfied and hate their life and the journey to have a baby.
Yeah, such a good point. Absolutely. And another thing that I think that stops people from going to the doctor is not knowing how to find a good doctor. What suggestions do you have? It's difficult because if you're in different areas in the country, is the answer to try different ones and get second opinions?
Right. I do think access to care is a big issue for a lot of people. I think people living in cities have a lot more choices,
Hmm.
and people living in rural areas are much more limited.
Yeah.
And so if you have the ability to, see different doctors and find that one that's a right fit for you, that's truly a luxury. And if you don't have that option, I think sometimes you can find a real advocate within the clinic. Sometimes it's a nurse that you can really connect with and ask those questions. Um, I think that it's important to find somebody that you can have real discussions with, and be an advocate for your care. I just think gone are the days where it's a very paternalistic doctor-patient relationship, where the doctor just says, this is what you do, and the patient doesn't ask questions and just does it.
Hmm.
I think if you can find someone that will just, have more of a conversation and allow you to ask questions and participate in your care, I think that could be a really good relationship.
Absolutely. I'm with you 100% about that. Unfortunately, it's not as uncommon in different areas of the world. We spoke about this in the pre-talk. Where you live is very progressive. The West just has always been progressive as far as health goes, and just being in the know, and also that respect that you have for patients is this is why I would love for you to live here. Because unfortunately it doesn't happen a lot. But I guess the point to be made, from what you're saying, which is great for people to hear, is that is how it should be. And if it's not, maybe question or consider going to get a second opinion, to find somebody who's willing to work with you and doesn't get as frustrated from your questions, or does, because that
Mhm.
does happen, that when you ask too many questions, some doctors are like, well, I'm the expert and this is how I do it, and that kind of thing. It's important to
Mhm.
have a partnership.
Yep. And you mentioned this before in our discussion, the importance of having a team.
Hmm.
So sometimes people can find support in, if they have to go to a reproductive endocrinologist in order to do IVF, they can find support, like I said, like a nurse in the clinic that might answer their questions if the doctor isn't doing that role.
Hmm.
Might also find, fertility advocates in the area, acupuncturists or nutritionists or support groups that can, provide that support. You kind of build a team
Yeah.
so that it's not just, you don't feel isolated, and you have that support you need to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting different perspectives and different, it kind of creates a more whole of type perspective.
Hmm.
And so what questions should people ask if they have been going through fertility challenges, have never gone to see a reproductive endocrinologist? I feel like it's so important to be armed with questions and know what to ask when you go, so that you feel more empowered in the journey, and more a part of the journey. Like, I mean, obviously there's a lot, but what are the main questions that people should go in thinking about or asking?
Sure. I think it's really nice if someone has a partner that they both go to the visit, because I think 4 ears are better than two.
Hmm.
Um,
Good
and
point.
even
Yeah.
sort of asking one of the partners to maybe take notes during the visit, because it's so easy to leave the visit and say, "Oh my gosh, I can't remember anything that was said."
Hmm.
Um, in general, big questions are, kind of what tests are we going to do? And, what's the plan? And kind of coming up with a long term plan can sometimes help people. If inseminations don't work, like when would you recommend IVF? Or, it might be nice to be a little bit strategic. And I think one of the best questions to ask at any visit is, you know, if I have more questions, how can I get those questions answered?
Oh, that's such a
'Cause,
good question.
is there an email? Is that I, call the nurses? Um, most IVF doctors that I know, don't give out their email or don't answer every single question personally, just because the nature of this treatment is there's just, I mean, we can get like 20 questions from one patient a day.
Hmm.
But just, knowing, how questions are going to be answered in the future, I think will relieve some stress.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that that is such a good question to ask is who do I contact? Because a lot of the frustrations I hear from my patients is I can't get an answer or I can't seem to get in touch with anybody. And at least if there's like an office staff or somebody that can be there having that contact would alleviate that huge frustration. So I think that that is such a good question to ask.
Hmm,
Um,
great.
so for people, do you only work with people that are local that actually come into your office? I would imagine that people actually travel probably to see you. And do you also have any kind of online type of consultation that you do?
That's a great question. And my practice does help people from a lot of different places. We're close to Alaska, we're close to Canada, um, Montana, Idaho. And so there are ways to care for patients that live elsewhere.
Hmm.
But it's usually in the setting of IVF, that they're planning to do a cycle and kind of get some monitoring and care where they live, but then come to Seattle for their retrieval. Um, the caring for somebody with recurrent miscarriage, it's it's difficult to do over the phone,
Hmm.
quite honestly. It's a long-term relationship usually, and it really does require a lot of care. So I haven't found a great way to do that long distance.
Hmm.
Um, I think it just because the nature of recurrent miscarriage is if you conceive, you need to kind of go to the clinic right away and kind of get testing and maybe ultrasounds and care. And if it's another miscarriage, helping with the follow up from that. And that's just not it's just not as easy to do over the phone.
Yeah.
Somebody really needs somebody in their town to care for them best. And so, I haven't found a great way to care for people long distance in that particular setting.
Yeah, no, I agree, and also, well, it is because they do have telemedicine, but I think in this particular instance, it's difficult because you need to actually do a lot of testing and be with the people. But I will say, your books are a great way to give that care out and give a resource out to people from all over the world. So I think that's wonderful. And I just also, how do people find you? Like if somebody wants to look you up or is in the area and wants to work with you.
Oh, sure. Well, you did touch on something. Like I do write a lot. I have a blog. I have written several books, and my goal is to not see, every patient because I can't, but my goal is to empower people to be able to learn a little bit more and be advocates for themselves no matter where they are.
Hmm.
So I do appreciate your noting that because I do think people can get great care. It doesn't have to be from me. And a part of it is just learning a little bit more about the process. But I do really try to help educate and connect with people. I do have a website. It's drlorashahine.com. And then I'm on a lot of different social media outlets, Instagram, and most recently TikTok
I
has
love
been a
that. My
fun
kids
way
love
to
TikTok.
educate. It's really fun. So I am on Facebook. I am on Twitter. All my handles are all Dr. Lora Shahine. And it's LoraShahine. And I just think that Instagram and TikTok are just so much easier to communicate with people and to really get the message out there. So I'm not on Twitter and Facebook as much.
Great. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. I think that you've given such great resources just within like 45 minutes. So I really appreciate that. I love what you're doing. I love the example that you are. Like, I really actually enjoy following you on Instagram. You post a lot of really good tips. It's very abundant and prolific with your tips, and it's got a very cute and lighthearted energy to it as well. So I really appreciate you coming on, and who knows, maybe again I'll have you come on again in the future. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.